in the Black Cloak. Chapter 3. Serafina slowly opened her eyes. She didn't know how long she'd been asleep, or even where she was. She found herself crammed into a tight, dark space, her face pressed up against metal. She heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She stayed quiet and listened. It was a man in work boots, tools jangling. Feeling a burst of happiness, she wriggled her way out of the machine and into the morning sunlight pouring through the laundry windows. "Here I am, Pa!" she cried, her voice parched and weak. "I've been gnawing on leather looking for you," her Pa scolded. "You weren't in your bed this morning." She ran forward and hugged him, pressing herself into his chest. He was a large and hardened man with thick arms and rough, calloused hands. His tools hung from his leather apron, and he smelled faintly of metal, oil, and leather straps that drove the workshop's machines. In the distance, she heard the sounds of the staff arriving for the morning, the clanking of pots in the kitchen, and the conversations of the workers. It was a glorious sound to her ears. The danger of the night was gone. She had survived. Wrapped in her father's arms, she felt safe and at home. He was more accustomed to mallets and rivets than a kind word, but he'd always taken care of her, always loved and protected her. She couldn't hold back the tears of relief stinging her eyes. "Where have you been, Sarah?" her father asked. "He tried to get me, Pa! He tried to kill me!" "What are you going on about, girl?" her Pa said suspiciously, holding her by the shoulders with his huge hands. He looked intently into her face. "Is this another one of your wild stories?" "No, Pa," she said, shaking her head. "I ain't in any kind of mood for stories. A man in a black cloak took a girl, and then he came after me. I fought him, Pa. I bit him a good one. I spun around and clawed him, and I ran, and I got away and I hid. I crawled into your machine, Pa. That's how I got away. It saved me." "What you mean he took a girl?" her Pa said, narrowing his eyes. "What girl?" He made her. She was right in front of me, and then she vanished before my eyes." "Come on now, Sarah," he said doubtfully. "You sound like you don't know whether you're washing your clothes or hanging 'em out." "I swear, Pa," she said. "Just listen to me." She took a good hard swallow and started at the beginning. As the story poured out of her, she realized how brave she'd actually been. But her Pa just shook his head. "You've had a bad dream is all. Been reading too many of them ghost stories. I told you to stay away from Mr. Poe. Now look at you. You're all scruffed up like a cornered possum." Her heart sank. She was telling him the God's honest truth, and he didn't believe a word of it. She tried to keep from crying, but it was hard. She was going on 13, and he was still treating her like a child. "I wasn't dreaming, Pa," she said, wiping a snipple from her nose. "Just calm yourself down," he grumbled. He hated it when she cried. She'd known since she was little that he'd rather wrangle with a good piece of sheet metal than deal with a weepy girl. "I've got to go to work," he said gruffly, as he separated from her. "The dynamo busted something bad last night. Now get on back to the workshop and get some proper sleep in you." Hot frustration flashed through her, and she clenched her fists in anger. But she could hear the seriousness in his voice and knew there was no point in arguing with him. The Edison dynamo was an iron machine with copper coils and spinning wheels that generated a new thing called electricity. She knew from the books she'd read that most homes in America didn't have running water, indoor toilets, refrigeration, or even heating. But Biltmore had all these things. It was one of the few homes in America that had electric lighting in some of the rooms. But if her pa couldn't get the dynamo working by nightfall, the Vanderbilts and their guests would be plunged into darkness. She knew he had a lot of things on his mind, and she wasn't one of them. A wave of resentment swept through her. She tried to save a girl from an evil black-cloaked demon thing and almost got herself killed in the process. But her pa didn't care. All he cared about was his stupid machines. He never believed her about anything. To him, she was just a little girl. Nothing important. Nothing worth listening to. Nothing anyone could count on for anything. As she walked glumly back to the workshop, she fully intended to follow her pa's instructions. But when she passed the stairway that led up to the Biltmore Estate's main floor, she stopped and looked up the stairs. She knew she shouldn't do it. She shouldn't even think about doing it. But she couldn't help it. Her pa had been telling her for years that she shouldn't go upstairs. But lately, she'd been trying to follow his rules at least some of the time. But today, she was furious that he hadn't believed her. It'd serve him right if I didn't listen to him. She thought about the girl in the yellow dress. She tried to make sense of what she'd seen. The horrible black cloak and the wide-eyed fear in the girl's face as she disappeared. Where had the girl gone? Was she dead or somehow still alive? Was there still a chance she could be saved? Snippets of conversation drifted down the stairs. There was some sort of commotion. Had they found a body? Were they all crying in despair? Were they searching for a murderer? She didn't know if she was brave or stupid, but she had to tell someone what she'd seen. She had to figure out what had happened. Most of all, she had to help the girl in the yellow dress. She began to climb the stairs. Staying as small and quiet as she could, she crept up the steps one by one. A cacophony of sounds floated down to her. The echo of people talking, the rustling of clothes, dozens of different footsteps. It was a crowd of many people. Something was definitely happening up there. We've got to keep to ourselves, you and I. Her pa's warning played in her mind as she climbed. There ain't no sense in people seeing you and asking questions. She slunk to the top of the stairway, then ducked into an alcove on the main floor that looked onto a huge room, full of fancy-dressed people, who seemed to be gathering for some type of grand social event.